essentially, actually, the talk that I'm giving is a talk that I gave in U.S. Congress as part of this move by the mathematics organizations to get them to invest money in basic research. And the reason why it's fitting is because it's really the same talk that I wanted to give you, which is sort of a story of modern cryptography as a way to illustrate how basic ideas can lead to commercial impact. And the story that I'm going to tell you took a lot more time than what things are taking today, but I think it's pretty impressive. So if you look at kind of the idea and where it originated from, and then you see where it got us to. So these are my affiliations over the years. Yeah, I was at MIT for 35 years. I was in the Weizmann Institute. In fact, I still have affiliations in both of these places, and now I'm at Berkeley. And the reason I'm putting this also is because to say that I've been around for a long time, not just because I want you to realize that I'm much older, like twice as much as all of you, I mean individually. But the point is that I've been sort of an eyewitness to a lot of surprising consequences of very basic and theoretical research, really. And these are sort of examples, you know, electronic commerce, you know, cloud computing, cryptocurrencies, even search, you know, the whole origin of thinking about quantum algorithms, you know, starting with Shor's work and Akamai, you know, content distribution. In any case, the point of this slide really is to say that all of these particular examples have come about due to some basic research. And, you know, what do I mean by basic research? You know, it's driven by curiosity, but the consequences are sort of unimaginable in two ways that you really don't imagine it, and that's not why you do it to begin with. And in several cases, there were really big hits. It is kind of unimaginable where you could get to. And the other thing, which is, again, less relevant to this audience, but was relevant to the government, is that the point was that small grants, very small grants, have brought on huge industries. So, you know, the kind of stories that are cryptographic along this theme are public key cryptography, zero-knowledge proofs, multi-party computation, and fully homomorphic encryption, post-quantum cryptography, and blockchains. And I assume that you've heard each one of these terms in some lecture or other, certainly the last one, because that's the topic here. So I won't talk about blockchains, obviously, but I will talk a little bit about each one of these other four. I do think that is the story of modern cryptography at this point. And in a sense, blockchains, you know, it's a remarkable story, but you know the story. And furthermore, a lot of the ideas behind have come from somewhere. So it's actually kind of interesting to see where. So first story, right? Example one, example everybody knows but must be told in any lecture on the story of modern cryptography is electronic commerce. So we all know, you know better than me, how much online banking, electronic commerce, buying and selling and so forth is being done. And you all know that it's all powered by cryptography. Those of you who still have Safari icon, you know this is the kind of thing that pops up, that it's an using encrypted connection and certificates. And this all starts with, you know, the most basic question of cryptography, right? There's communication. There's Alice and Bob, and they want to send messages to each other. And it used to be that they would meet and use and agree on some sort of secret information that enables them to understand each other. So even though Alice will send something encrypted, Bob will be able to figure it out, and nobody else can. And nobody else was listening on the line. So that's the basic wartime research problem of cryptography. That's sort of the first the first problem you give. But we know now that it's not Alice and Bob, but it's Alice, let's say, in some entity where there's lots of Alices. Maybe in one entity, could be Amazon, could be someone else. So there's no way that Alice and Amazon, Bob and Amazon, Shafi and Amazon, and so forth, and Linda and Amazon, we're all going to meet and exchange a secret key. Of course, you know, we have to remember that it wasn't that Amazon was around in 1976. It just was the idea that everybody can communicate was around. And the idea, which was, you know, incredible idea by Diffie and Hellman, was that right? They said, you know, we have this communication ability, and electronic commerce is something that can come. It's not just for wartime, and in which case we're all going to have to need to be able to communicate secretly without meeting each other. So they even sort of thought about this as a possibility, in the same way that we're thinking now that blockchains might be a possibility to change world economy and democratization and so forth. As far as I know, it's still a dream, right? But these guys in 76, and then they sort of provide a blueprint for what kind of a system would look like. And the blueprint is, there's a public lock where everybody could lock their secret messages. And again, this is in the form of an algorithm or information. And then there is a secret key known only to Bob or Amazon to unlock them. So they just said, wouldn't it be nice if we had, a mathematical expression to this lock and to this key, and then a year later, and they got the Turing Award for it, and then a year later, Rivestri and Adelman actually proposed how to do this lock and key using number theory, which is an example which I'm sure you all know, and it's what we use in algorithms classes, number theory classes, to say mathematics, very simple mathematics, has long-term consequences. So they use the factoring problem. And you probably have heard this, that Gauss quote, "The dignity of science itself seems to require that every possible means be explored for the solution of a problem so elegant." And the elegance is its simplicity, right? You have a number and you'd like to find the prime divisors. 15, it's 3 times 5. Of course, 15 is easy, 35 is easy. This number, 221, is fairly quick, but then it gets harder. So we're thinking about very, very large numbers, and it's hard to factor them. And the connection to the previous slide is that the lock is going to be the number, it's going to be the product, it's going to be like 35 or 15, and the key is going to be the factors. And it's hard from looking at the lock, to find the keys, the secret key to open it. And then you, of course, have to give a recipe how from this lock, you can actually lock. So in other words, encrypt a message, and I won't go there. So I think you all know how RSA works. Very simple transformation, some computation on your message, mod the number, and then there's a reverse computation when you get this to go back to the message. All right, but it's really, it's amazing. It's such a fabulous idea. It's using such simple mathematical basic idea. And it was, to the credit of the public, this was recognized immediately, like, wow, how cool, okay? And they cemented the transition really of the internet from primary military to primarily commercial. And the rest is history in a sense. The fact that we can do all these things that we are doing today is because we do trust that our communications are secret, that we can have digital signatures, that we can log into places without people stealing our, and so forth. So in terms of the original picture, they had a patent, and it was a patent supported by NSF. I think, even though I don't think they actually proposed this research, never mind. And then eventually it is what it is. So it's along the line that I promised the Congress, that you can go from basic idea to this multi-billion-dollar industry. And interesting though, if you think about the standardization process for RSA, it took a long time. So this is a timeline that I asked some of the people that were involved, like Rivest and Vitsos and so forth, and Bert Kaliski, and they told me all these significant points along the line where, from the point that RSA was invented, up there, no, sorry, that was going back. Okay, whatever, I don't think there's a pointer here. From 1982 was the first attempt at standardization. The thing was invented in 76. And then there's all these, it didn't get standardized till, I think, 2009. They explicitly specify RSA-based signature and encryption as a standard, okay? So it took a long time, right? 2009, how many years is this from 76? A lot. Now we are hopeful that the kind of things that we're doing today is not going to take that much time, because otherwise it's a little irrelevant, I guess, from a commercial point of view. An interesting point here is that they all recognize that the place where all of a sudden things got sped up was that there was a killer application, which was this Netscape browser. Okay, so I just want to mention that all of you are thinking, well, factoring, you've heard about quantum computers that can factor. So what does this have to do with us? So in 1982, around, Richard Feynman envisioned this powerful quantum computer, really a theoretical computer on a piece of paper. And then in 94, Peter Shor, who now is at MIT, then he was at Bell Labs, he said, if we had such a quantum computer and there were no errors and we could sort of run it on a large inputs, then we have a fast algorithm for factoring numbers using this quantum computer. So that's all vague, because you're using it all the time. What's going to happen? Everybody can read my messages and log in as me. The thing is, you don't have to worry too much, because I think the biggest number is maybe 35. But there is one number, which is 143 digits, that has been factored. But I think pretty regularly you can factor numbers that are smaller than it, but not very useful. Having said that, you all know that there's lots of companies and countries and governments are racing toward building a quantum computer. You probably have heard about this Google, it's not an announcement yet, but sort of an announcement about the quantum supremacy. Do you know what I'm talking about? Obviously, because everybody seems like either you're bored out of your mind or something else. But in any case, but you know what they're doing there essentially is not a computation, it's a sampling of a distribution, and they can sample it with using quantum computers better than classically. It's nowhere near doing a factoring because it's not even that type of computation and certainly not a large computation. Still, you know, one can't wait till the moment that that will happen if it does happen. So what do we do? And again, basic research comes to the rescue. So in 1996, there was a paper by Miklos Aitai, it was IBM, who showed an entirely new form of cryptography using geometry in place of number theory. So he said, okay, let's leave this problem about 35 is equal to 5 times 3, these type of problems. Let's look for other problems based on which we can build crypto systems. And he has nothing to do with quantum. In a minute, we'll connect it to quantum. He invented this because there is some sort of theoretical property for these systems where they're as hard to break on an average instance as they are in the worst case instance, which is not true necessarily for factoring, at least we can't prove it. And that's why that whole invention came about as interesting to cryptography. But what happened was that he just invented a very simple form. It wasn't even a public key cryptography. It was some sort of some cryptographic operation. And then, but people in theory paid attention. And from then on till today, there's essentially using these new form of hardness from geometry. There's lots and lots of cryptographic constructions and capabilities, which are, it so happens, quantum resilient, meaning that even quantum computers were to be built, you know, without all the scaling problems that we have in practice, we don't know any algorithmic way to solve these problems. So cryptography would be safe. Now that might change as well, but people have looked at it, there is no structure there really that we have in factoring, so it's not clear where the hook is to try to exploit quantum computers, okay? So this is probably the most technical slide here. What is the problem? What is this problem from geometry? It doesn't look like a geometry problem, but one can show that this is equivalent to a geometry problem. The problem is, whereas in the factoring thing, you know, the secret was these 2 primes, you know, like the 3 and 5. Here, let's think of the secret as a vector S. Let's just think of it as a vector of numbers. When I write ZQN, so it's an n-long vector, and each entry is some number between, let's think about it, between 1 and q. Okay, and q is some large prime. And what you're given is a sort of a public key, is not the product of the numbers, and there are no numbers here. What you're given is a set of equations, so coefficients and solutions on the right-hand side, in the variables, in S. So if you think about the entries of S as S1 through Sn, these are variables, they're secret, and the public is some equations in this variable. Now, of course, if you really gave the equations, then you could do Gaussian elimination, find out this S. You don't really give this equation, you give it, on the right-hand side, you give sort of a noisy equation. So you add some noise to the right-hand side. So I'm giving you a whole bunch of equations with noisy solutions, and I'm asking you, hey, can you figure out what S1 through Sn? As the claim is, this is a hard problem. Now, this claim is supported by the fact that it's as hard as a classical question in geometry, and the best algorithm we know, even on quantum computers, is exponential. So it seems to be a very hard problem that's been around since, you know, 2000 or something like that. That's not as old as the factoring problem, but the geometry problem underneath it is a much more ancient problem. The issue is that looking at this problem, you have no idea what is the lock and what is the key. The lock is these equations, the key is the S, and there is a way to use this for public key cryptography, for sending messages, for digital signatures, and much more. In fact, you can do things like homomorphic encryption, which is an encryption scheme that has extra structure in it that enables you to actually work on, you do operations on encrypted messages. Not just encrypt and decrypt, but actually take 2 encrypted messages and magically, without decrypting, come up with a 3rd encrypted messages, which is encryption of the underlying 2 messages, a function on the underlying 2 messages, like adding them or multiplying them or any program you want to run on them. So there's a lot of versatility to this problem. And my point really is, for saying all this, is to say that again, sort of basic research comes to solve a problem that we didn't even know we were going to have. So the solution here is to this quantum computer problem. But the problem was introduced really for showing average versus worst case hardness. So again, it's this very surprising impact. And in fact, NIST, there's a post is declared that they want to do standardized post-quantum cryptography that's really based on these operations that cannot be broken by a quantum computer. And there's a lot of proposals, and it's out there. I mean, this is what's going to be. The internet is going to be using these type of cryptography rather than the one that it's using right now within a few years. So next story. Next story is zero-knowledge proofs. So you know this, but it's a nice story. I'll tell it anyway. So we're still with Alice and Bob, but this time they don't want to just send secret messages. She says, I'm Alice, let me buy something on Amazon. He says, prove you're Alice. She gives him a password. So that's very nice. Now say Bob is Amazon. He stores all these passwords in a database, and when Alice comes in, he checks. So there are a couple of problems with this, of course. One is that she sent the password over the lines, so you'd like to encrypt the password. Another thing is that Amazon is actually storing all these. And who says who's going to break into what? So people apparently there's breaks all the time. And wouldn't it be nice if we could, so these are some breaks, for different companies. And wouldn't it be, and I don't mean to single anybody out. This is just things I found on the internet because I am not that much into looking. So in any case, wouldn't it be nice if instead of that, Alice can just prove to Bob that she knows this password and he won't even know what it is. She just proves it to him. I know it, okay, but I'm not giving it to you. So there's nothing to, so even if they break into Amazon, they can't find it. And he's not liable for it and so forth. And that's exactly, so if we translate it to number theory, let's say the password is the prime factors of n, so like 3 and 5. What identifies Alice is n, and she wants to prove to Amazon or Bob that she knows the factors. She could give him the 3 and 5, the prime factors, the key, but that's no good again. Because it's already a little better, right? Because he can now multiply the key together and check that it really is equal to n, but now he has it. So we don't want that. So instead, we want her to prove to Bob that she knows P and Q without giving them ever. And in fact, somehow proving in some strong definitional sense, mathematical sense, that after this transaction, he knows that she knows, Amazon knows that Alice knows P and Q, but he has absolutely no idea. He's no better off than before this exchange to figure out what P and Q are. Okay? Great. So, so this is in '85. We came up, this was Silvio and Charlie Rakoff, with this paper introducing zero-knowledge proofs. And the idea is, more generally than passwords, to demonstrate that you know a proof by solving, that you know a proof without giving it. And if you go one more level into what is the idea will be is that we show a way to take a classical proof, which would be like the divisors of n, and convert it into a whole bunch of mathematical challenges that are presented by Amazon to Alice. And if she can solve these challenges, it convinces him she must have known the classical proof. So let's say that every classical proof that I don't want to give converts to a bunch of challenges that I'm able to solve because I know the proof, that I will be able to solve it. But if I didn't know the proof, so I wasn't Shafi or Alice or whoever is trying to convince Amazon, I wouldn't have been able to solve these random challenges. And being random means that every time I log in, there are new challenges. So it's not that it's the same old challenges and somebody who records the history can respond the same way. Question? So there's a way to transform classical proofs to zero-knowledge proofs. So in other words, the person who knows the classical proof, knows the factorization of n, can convince Amazon of that fact, and nobody else can. And furthermore, after the proof, you still haven't found out anything else. It looks like random junk, answers to questions which are, in some sense, not meaningful. So this enables access authorization without fear of identity theft. This is just only one application. There are lots of applications by now. You probably know more than me, the current ones. These are some like Zcash, cryptocurrency, which protects privacy and anonymity. There is even sort of far-afield applications like to nuclear disarmament, which sounds kind of nuts. But forget about nuclear disarmament. A nice application that has some digital interpretation is, suppose you are, there's a crime, and you are a suspect in a crime. And you want to give a DNA sample to show that you were not on the crime scene, so that your DNA does not match what is in the crime scene. Is there a way to do that without giving your DNA away, so that they won't have it now and later they could figure out that you've committed some other crimes and you don't want them to be able to do so? So the question here is, how do you prove in zero knowledge that you were not in the crime scene? And again, DNA doesn't sound like digital information, but really the way that people figure out whether DNAs match or not is that they digitize, your DNA, and then they look at particular places, and there's some notion of what it means for two DNA samples to be of the same person or not. And it really is a question about whether two pieces of information are equal or not equal, and how to figure this out in zero knowledge. So that's another application. Another application is this picture down here. It's a recent paper of mine with some people that was in Newsniks, and that is, it turns out that there's a lot of surveillance going on, as you know, both inside the country and international, and that's all fine because there's some judge who gives authority, after the FBI request. But it turns out that in the law, it says that these judges are supposed to, after the investigation is over, they're supposed to lift the gag order. Everybody's supposed to be able to scrutinize these requests, and that doesn't happen. Just in practice, they're swamped with work. They don't lift those secrecy orders, and that is not the way it's supposed to be, because then you have no way to judge the magnitude of surveillance and what is the categories under which surveillance was done and so forth. So another thing you could imagine is that when a surveillance order is issued, that there is some sort of zero knowledge proof that it's according to the rules, and according to the spirit of the law, and you would be able to add, say, how many requests have been made and whether they were one category or another category. So there's a lot of accountability that could be factored in using zero knowledge, because you want to have accountability without disclosing details of who is being surveillance, who's the judge who's actually done it, and so forth. So that's yet another field, sort of law and enforcement of law and accountability of law enforcement, which people are using zero knowledge for now. Again, in a sense, if we think about the transformation in terms of money, we had this paper on zero knowledge. We did not patent it, unfortunately. And in any case, somebody's making money on it. All right. So that's the picture of this surveillance thing. This is just in the, with FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Security Act, then even there are these surveillance requests that obey something called a set of secret laws, and nobody knows what the laws are, so how do you even check? But you could imagine, so it seems futuristic, but you could sort of encrypt the rules, encrypt the laws, encrypt the surveillance, and just see that they match using zero knowledge. Again, it's checking consistency without finding out details. So there's this beautiful quote by Kafka, which is kind of relevant, where he says, "Our laws are not generally known. They're kept secret by a small group of nobles who rule us. We're convinced that these ancient laws are scrupulously administered. Nevertheless, it is an extremely painful thing to be ruled by laws that one does not know." So it's an interesting quote in this context. Also, zero knowledge is standardization. I talked about standardization of public key cryptography. There is an effort for standardizing zero knowledge. There's already been a second conference. This is the picture from the second zero knowledge proof workshop, which happened in Berkeley, and the next event is in Amsterdam. Okay. So now fast forward to the 21st century, because this is public key cryptography, quantum. These are the basic ideas from a long time ago. And it's still, we were talking about communication and authentication, right? Like you could encrypt and you could log in. But these days we're talking about data, right? So there's all this data in the cloud, and we know that's very good. I mean, it's very good in the sense that, disease control and research, predictions for financial markets, economic growth, traffic rerouting, smart energy usage, speech and vision, and so forth. So there's amazing utility. And it seems these days at least that we need really large data in order to get all this utility. And usually large amounts of data don't sit in one place, unless you're Google or Facebook or something. But you need really large cohorts to detect small effects. And it seems like you need to collaborate across institutions. It's very clear in the genomic space, or hospital space, that every hospital may have 300 cases, 500 cases, if you're a big center. But you need many more cases. to get large effects. So that asks you, how are you going to collaborate across institutions? So now it's not a question of just encrypting and sending information across institutions. It's I don't want this other institution to actually hold the data, and I still want to compute on unions of sets of data, and there might be data of different form also. It's not all this just a question of volume. It's also a question of fusing different type of data sets. So probably people heard here about this Visa and Google example. Anybody heard about it? Okay, so that's an interesting example where Google, they have their ad model, and they would like to show that there's a correlation between seeing the ad and purchasing, but sometimes people purchase actually in the store, using a Visa card. So how do they find out whether having shown the ads actually resulted in purchase? So there's a project between Visa or MasterCard, I can't remember which one of them, and Google where they do set intersection. So on one hand, there's the customers. On the other hand, there's who use Google, the customers who use Visa, and what's the volume that's in the intersection? But they don't want to give each other the data. So again, it's sort of private computation on joint data cases. And that's an example where the kind of data each one of them has is very different, right? It's not it's not just more data. It's different kind of data that has value. All right, so I don't know what this is. Oh yeah, this is just examples of not only that they don't want to give each other the data, I think that they don't want to hold each other's data, because all you need is that somebody's going to break into your computer and then you're liable. So it's sort of almost a toxic asset. So math and crypto can do this, can help you do this. Compute on disjoint data sets, each individual's own or individual entities, without giving them away. And essentially the technology behind that is secure multi-party computation, fully homomorphic encryption, searchable encryption, and I'll just use a few more minutes, is that okay? To talk about each one of them. I guess I went faster than I thought, but we'll have time for questions. So what's secure multi-party computation? So abstractly, let's think of these different databases. This could be Visa and Google and MasterCard, or it could be several hospitals in the West Coast and the East Coast, and in Europe holding genomic data, health records, pharmacy prescriptions, and so forth, trying to predict some kind of trend in disease, or maybe coming up with a cure. But they can't really send the information to each other. They don't want to, they can't, because of regulation. So what this theorem says is that there's a way for them to send messages to each other so that at the end they can all know what the answer is, sort of what's the result of running some algorithm and combine data sets, but they're not going to have to look, or they're not able to look at each other's data set. So distrustful parties can run any program and derive conclusions on their collective data without revealing their data to each other. So you sort of reveal the result and nothing but the result. These are works from the early 80s, the original sort of showing that this is possible, 87, 86. But it's only now that people are starting to actually do this. Only now is not true, last 10 years or so. And I'll show you some examples where that's done. Now, I'm hiding lots of details here for Congress, but for you, there's an assumption underneath here. The assumption is that various types of assumptions. You have one result where just you, in a sense, assume the factoring is hard, or this geometry problem is hard. Another result is that you assume that more than half of these databases are good guys. They're not going to try to figure out what other people have, in which case you can actually do it based on, even without assuming computational assumptions. So there's a bunch of conditions, which gives you different theorems, which tell you how you can do this. And the math underlying it, just sort of to give an idea, is essentially, this is a simple case. So you have a polynomial here. It's a cubic polynomial, I guess, maybe fifth degree. And the idea of a polynomial here is, and this goes back to work by Adi Shamir on secret sharing and to a paper by mine of how to use these secret shares. So the idea is that I will represent my data in a different way than just data. I will somehow represent it by polynomials, and then these polynomials can be evaluated in many points, and only if there's enough evaluation points one can reconstruct the polynomial and therefore my data. And I will give the value on different evaluation points to different centers. So if they all get together and they want to recapture my data, they can. But under the assumption that not all of them are bad guys, they cannot. Okay, or under the assumption that I've encrypted it in some complicated way. And now they have a share of my data. Okay, how are they going to compute on it? They can recover, but how about computing just with the share without recovering? So there is a way to sort of use these shares, like these polynomial evaluation points on different polynomials in order to add them, multiply them, do operations on them, and yet you're not going to find, that doesn't enable you to reconstruct the polynomial. So there's a way to do any program. It's a universal theorem. It's not just simple operations, any operation. Okay, so in principle, you could compute any program you want on data distributed among all these people. And this is started in the 80s. There's work on it till today. I guess that should be 2019. It started with secret sharing by Shamir. There's something called garbled circuits, oblivious transfer, and homomorphic encryption, which is sort of the newest kid on the block, even though it itself is not new either. It's already 10 years. And the idea of homomorphic encryption, all of these are sort of different ways. They contribute to different ways of doing that universal theorem, where we can compute on disjoint data. And with respect to blockchains, you can think about data putting on the blockchain by lots and lots of entities, and you'd like to sort of use that data to do analytics or use that data to compute things without having clear access to each data item. But how do you do it? And my point is that you can do it using ideas really going back to the 80s and research, research has been fundamental to the story of modern cryptography. So what's homomorphic encryption? I've mentioned it a few times. So this is the picture to keep in mind. Let's think there's a client, and this could be a small company, and they want to run analytics on their data, but they don't have the analytics programs, or they don't have the computing power to run big machine learning and so forth. So they want to use the cloud. But they don't want to give the cloud their data. They would like to sort of encrypt their data, and here I'm saying ENC is homomorphic encryption. So it's a special kind of encryption. Okay, such that the cloud can run the algorithm here is a program F, on the data, so that analytics on the data, and send back the result, telling them what they wanted to know without them having to invest the computing power and the resources or release their data. And this can be extended to many clients. It's something called multi-key homomorphic encryption. And ultimately, this is just a new type of multi-party computation. It's a way to do multi-party computation. But what's nice about it is that it has really low communication and not that much interaction, messages going back and forth between the different entities. And it's robust against some insiders, because everything is going to be encrypted on the cloud. They're never going to be able to decrypt, even though they can do computation for you. And also, homomorphic encryption there's a standardization effort. In fact, it precedes the zero-knowledge standardization. The zero-knowledge standardization has been inspired by this. And this has been happening, there's big players in this, which is Microsoft, and IBM, and Duality, which is a company that I'm a co-founder of. And it's really the companies that are driving this, because obviously they want this to be used. And it's an interesting thing that also with RSA, the company was driving it. So the standardization effort, even though the ideas come from often research labs or academia, the standardization effort is being run by industry or startups. So you could combine techniques, get small communication, small computation, combining this fully homomorphic encryption, multi-party computation from the 80s. It's a big toolkit, and it's not clear. It depends on the application of which one is best to use, and use it in combination. There's a lot of data science that goes into it. So there's some engineering work to do, as well as research. So I just want to say that this has been used, these sort of multi-party computation, regardless of whether they're the 80s technology or the new homomorphic encryption. Where has it been used? I'm okay? Sure, 2 minutes. It's been used in financial markets, in auctions, in market clearing houses, in economic benchmarks, VAT tax, like figuring out that it all balances out. This is old stuff in some sense. It's European research, used actually in Denmark and in Estonia. And why there? Because there are researchers there who have connections with government agencies, and they have made them realize that this is important technology and should be used. it's been used in automation. You know, there's a proposal, I think the US government has grants out on satellite collisions, making sure that they know they're aware of where the locations are without telling each other, let's say different countries where a satellite is located and you don't want it to collide. So that's again, multi-party and you want privacy. It's been proposed for map routing without knowing exactly where you are, that to enable you to get from point A to point B, avoiding congestion. So I think this is more paper rather than, with a prototype, but not a system that's been used. It's been proposed again for medical, you know, even with neural nets at this point, that you would have like a hospital with maybe an expertise, and then you would have an a doctor who's maybe in a rural area or something who wants to use the expertise in the hospital, but doesn't want to give the images. So how do you run, let's say, a neural net on encrypted images? Again, it's a two-party computation. Each one has security concerns. The hospital may not want to give his program out. The doctor doesn't want to give the MRI results out. Yeah, so that's just what I'm writing here. What else do I want to say about this? You probably have heard about training. So there's this thing called federated learning, where they're trying to learn predictive text or something, access to lots of people's phones. How do they do that without revealing what people are typing? Well, with respect to my phone, it's not working. But in any case, there is a case here to use multi-party computation where the parties are, let's say, whoever's doing the predictive text, Apple, Google, whatever, and the customers who are actually typing. And it has been used. So is being used. Then the last thing is sort of public good. So in Boston, there was a big project pushed by BU University about wage disparity, to have the Boston companies being able to tell whether women are making as much as men, but nobody wants to give their data. So the idea was that they would do a multi-party computation. They won't give their data directly to anybody, not to a third party, not to other companies, and they would compute a benchmark, which is what is the average salaries, and then they can decide for themselves if they're above or below, and make whatever conclusions they like. So their goal here is evaluating sort of success, I guess. And another place it's been talked about is in the context of education outcomes. So students go to universities, they pay a lot of money. Your parents must have paid a lot of money. I'm paying a lot of money. And, and the question is it all worth it? So education outcomes, how do you judge it? So universities give information, and then there's sort of multi-party computation to decide whether this, you can deem this education worth it or not. So you can think about it as a market. All right, I think that's it. So my ending line to the government was, you should invest in basic research, because what we've done in 76, or what RSA did in 76, or Diffie and Hellman, it's not really clear where we would be. It's kind of shocking, right, without that research. So we have no idea what's going to happen in 2050 if we don't invest in basic research. And I think that's it. If there are broader lessons, you have to pay attention to good ideas. It could take a long time, as you saw by that standardization thing. And it seems to be necessary but not sufficient to have a good idea, to have an industry that has an incentive to be involved, to have standardization, and to have patience. Thank you.
Shafi, thank you for the great presentation. Just a quick question. As you know, there's been a lot of developments in predictive analytics and predictive modeling. In fact, we're all creatures of habits here. You could collect enough information from the social sites to reconstruct what we do on a daily basis and take pretty good guesses in terms of what our passwords would be based on our behavior and based on information that we have. So what do you think will happen in the future in terms of cryptography, and how do you think it's going to impact things going forward?
So what you're outlining is about predicting our behavior in multitude of arenas is both good and scary, right? We were just driving in the car across the Bay Bridge, and the person who was driving, Amy, was telling me, we were talking about the fact how beautiful San Francisco is, and it looks like Disneyland living here, because I lived in Cambridge for 35 years, and she said, in a minute you're going to have ads about Disneyland. Just because we said it in the car. I don't know, I haven't checked my phone yet, but hopefully not. But in any case, the point is that cryptography has a role to play in somehow, but it's not going to happen by itself, right? To protect all this data and still be able to get what we want out of it. I mean, it's clear. That's your question, right? So what role is it going to play? I think that it depends on all of you, you know, in a sense. The more value probably somebody's going to make out of it, money, the more likely it is that it will become an ingrained part of all systems. So predictive analytics, if there is a market there, I believe it will be used. They'll be able to do predictive analytics on encrypted data rather than just require or go after all the data that's out there. And it's not, you know, I'm not an economist. I don't know how these things come about. You know, when it's clear that you know, in applications where you like a car, you can't go, or a train or something, you can't get from point A to point B. You need to have some vehicle or transportation. With cryptography and privacy, it's sort of added value, right? So we need to think, where is it that we can get added value that we can't do it now? And that's the way in, yes? And once these tools are out there, I'm a big believer that they will be used, especially with public pressure.
Sorry for hogging the questions in this corner up here. You have this unique perspective as this cryptographer, and I'm curious if you're willing to share with us some of the limitations or problems you see in the cryptocurrency, either the community or the technical challenges, the limitations or problems, technical or otherwise?
I think that my experience as a cryptographer is that, you know, technical limitations are overcome usually once you recognize them and admit to them. So, you know, there's this thing about, what do they call it, the trilemma or something, about the fact that you cannot have scalability and security, and what else is the third one? Decentralization. And what was it? And decentralization. And I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that was possibly true with using proof of work, but there's other ways to achieve it. So my sense is, technically, if you recognize, you understand the problems inherently, these are not problems that are not solvable. And in terms of community, so there was a lot of resistance in government, there still is, right? But now I understand they are open to start talking about a digital dollar. It's something that starts to be discussed. And that was not the case before. This is, I understood from some talking to some colleagues in Facebook, that a lot, you know, there's a lot of scrutiny for, like, you know, Facebook. But on the other hand, the fact that they entered the marketplace with cryptocurrencies means that it's there. And I think that what we see now is not going to be true in, you know, down the line in terms of the position. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you again. That was a great presentation. So you opened by talking about you were visiting Congress, which is interesting because you talk about a lot of these areas where there's opportunity to use this. They're highly regulated areas, and let's just like take healthcare as an easier example. Is that an area, or are there many areas where it has to start with lawmakers, or do you think there's plenty of opportunities for it not to start with lawmakers? And how can lawmakers even begin to approach such a complicated topic in a productive way?
Right, I agree with you. But the thing is that about health market is interesting, because how is it done today? They're still collaborating, right? But it's done, there's an expert that says it's okay. And if you've seen the guidelines for these experts, who are they anyway? Sometimes it's people that I've never heard of. And often they don't have to, they disappear. It's hard to reach them afterwards. So there are ways that it's being achieved today, but these are better ways. So it's not that we're going to do something new, we're just going to do it differently. Of course, you have to believe the cryptography. And I do think that there's an opportunity. I don't think it's going to come from law. I think if we are ready and we give them an opportunity to scrutinize it, then they might go there. But they're certainly not going to originate it. They have no idea, in my opinion, what do we mean, you know, about what's possible. I noticed that. I'm talking to people that I'm sure know all this stuff, and they have never heard of it. And it's been around for a long time. So I think we have to do a better job. And I think the whole blockchain industry has done an amazing service to crypto because people are talking about it. You know, the term zero knowledge, you know, we invented this in '85. It's only now that people actually, I hear this term thrown back at me, like, that's interesting. But it's because of the whole blockchain and possibility that this is going to be profitable, right? So I think it has to start there.
One more question.
Thanks.
At the recent Google I.O., Sundar, I think, spoke about homomorphic encryption and federated learning, how Google was doing more of this, starting to. Do you feel that they actually are doing this? To what extent? I guess I had sort of hesitancy. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I don't work for Google, but the researchers are amazing. So they certainly have the capability of doing it. Are they doing it? I don't think so. But I mean, maybe. Sometimes. I mean, I don't know.
All right, let's give it up for Shafi. Thank you so much.